Hi, good morning, everyone. Hello, and thank you for coming. My name is Kathy Wright. I am Boost Manager of Strategic Contracting and Procurement. Welcome to our third presentation this month, Understanding CTAs and JVs, the pros and cons you need to know. Our presenters for today are Sean Laird and Stephanie Alexander. Sean is a senior contracts and training consultant with Boost and helps our customers with contracts training. She offers online classes on topics ranging from contracts for project managers to deep dives on contracting compliance topics. She also does all things contracts, from redlining and negotiating NDAs, teaming agreements, and subcontracts, along with everything else that happens in a day-to-day contract shop. Stephanie is the co-founder partner of GovMates, a premier free teaming platform for innovative federal contractors. They provide teaming introductions, help commercial companies navigate the federal space, provide technology scouting, and work with some of the most innovative, non-traditional companies in the federal market. Her deep understanding of the GovCon ecosystem positions her as a sought-after advisor in the industry. The presentation portion of today's event will last around 45 minutes, and we will conclude with a questions and answer session for the last 15 minutes. Please use the Zoom questions feature to send me your questions as they come up, and I'll pass them to Sean and Stephanie at the end. At the end of the series, we'll make all 4 presentations available through Boost's website. We know you're going to enjoy today's presentation. So Sean, the microphone is yours. Sean, I think you're on mute.
No, I got you. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on partnering. Just like to take a moment to say thank you for everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for what I hope will be some valuable insight. So let's get started. We've got several topics we're going to discuss today, including the EO 14240, as well as 3 different types of partnering opportunities, followed by a special segment on GovMates that Stephanie's going to provide. Next slide. Okay, so first thing and foremost, we want to talk about, some of you may have heard there was a new executive order for 14240, eliminating waste and saving taxpayer dollars by consolidating procurement, that was issued on March 20th of this year. And the purpose was to address how the federal government purchases common goods and services across all the agencies and departments. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, typically, or at least usually, what's been going on is agencies and departments often have used GSA, but have often relied on self-established vehicles such as, Army ITAs or NASA CHES, or NASA SOUP, or internal MAC IDIQs that they have set up to purchase common goods and services. And so what this is saying now is that this is all going to be consolidated and centralized so that these buys are being purchased under new and or existing GSA vehicles. Okay. This could be via your GSA MOS, or it could be under a GSA administered GWAC, or government-wide acquisition contract. Okay. Basically, a lot of the implementation, unfortunately, is still pending. But while the exact details of how this is going to be implemented are still being assessed, this EO has created a renewed focus, if you will, on GSA as a primary source. Okay, and that is to include among DoD, NASA, the Coast Guard, which typically have had, exemptions to using, certain required sources in the past, and this EO does not provide for that exception. So it's going to be a shift for those areas as well. Okay, so we figured, given all this and given the shift in priority toward GSA, it's a good time to get a refresh about the types of partnering agreements and teaming that are usually used under GSA. Next slide.
All right, we're going to start off early with a polling question this morning. As a prime contractor administering subcontract partners, what do you use for e-tools? Some of the choices are, we use everything. We do everything in our ERP, from the MSA to the funding, or we have to enter the data in the ERP, but we use the other tools like Word, Adobe, Excel, and Outlook for day-to-day management. Or maybe you have a specific tool for managing subcontracts that's your one-stop shop, or you do it all, you do all your work in-house and you don't really use subcontracts except maybe some 1099s. Okay, answers still coming in. Thank you. I see the responses. And I'm so glad you guys came today. The majority of you answered that you do all your work in-house with organic labor and maybe some 1099s. The second most popular answer is you do put your data in your ERP, but then use a combination of Adobe, Excel, Word, all these tools together, and sort of manage that way. And then no one said you do everything from your ERP, and a few of you have a specific program. Thank you for your answers. Back over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Kathy. So we're going to start off talking about probably something that's maybe you're not as familiar with, but again, with the shift in focus on GSA, is a multiple award schedule contract teaming agreement. And so, I'm sorry, arrangement. And so when we're talking about that, basically what this is it's a cooperative agreement, obviously, between two or more GSA mass contract holders. So in order to be on a MAS CTA, you have to have an existing GSA MAS contract. Okay, and the point is that multiple businesses can combine under this teaming arrangement and allow that team to be able to submit for bigger opportunities, more complex opportunities, and it's different. And we're going to discuss, as the presentation goes on, this is different than your typical either joint venture and or prime sub relationship. Okay, so when we're talking about, again, the MSAs, everybody's going to operate as a co-prime. Okay, that's going to be your biggest difference from your JV and or your prime sub relationships. Okay, and they are unique to the GSA mass, but can be a great strategic move to enhance what you're eligible for and what what experience and growth that you can get under your GSA mass. Next slide. Okay, so of course, just like with anything else, when we're looking at things, we're looking at the benefits and the concerns that we want to keep in mind, right? So when we're talking about a MSA CTA, as you can see, there's several different listed on here. Just to point out, for small businesses, becoming a co-prime versus operating as a sub can be huge for your growth. Okay, it allows you to be able to, gain more visibility with the government because again, you're operating in that co-prime status. You have direct interaction or can have direct interaction. You have privy of contract. You're sharing the risk, especially when you're talking about administrative burden. You're sharing that amongst the teams, as well as, of course, the financial burden. So all of those things can really help out and benefit that you find under these MSA CTAs. Okay, next slide. Okay, and again, just again, pointing out some of the additional benefits. So your privy of contract is one of them, right? As you've heard me say multiple times, you would be a co-prime under that, which means that you are going to have privy of contract as well. You're going to gain, that direct contact with the government that you wouldn't necessarily have in that prime sub relationship. Okay, which allows you, again, to get more visibility, to, for the government to see you and see you as an entity that is in that position and that can handle it and perform and provide the things that they're wanting and needing from you. Next slide. Of course, you always want to look at both sides, right? Anytime you're getting into any type of partnership, regardless of what it's for, you always want to look at both sides of the coin, right? And so to that end, there are some areas in a MSA CTA that we would encourage you to keep an eye out for. Okay, because of course, with that preview contract, with that co-prime relationship, it's also very important to make sure that when you're forming your CTA and your team, that things are very clearly laid out for you. Okay, so these are some areas that you want to keep an eye on out when you're forming that team, and keep an eye out in your agreement, especially to make sure that they're well defined and very explicit in how communication is going to be handled. Making sure that the roles of who's going to be performing what labor and what work under the government contract are very well laid out. The government's going to want to see that, and it's also obviously very, very good for you guys. Okay, making sure that everybody is compliant. You have, one thing with the MSA CTA is that you do have an extra layer of compliance in that everybody has to be compliant with their individual GSA MOS contract, as well as the team needs to be compliant. Because if one team member is not compliant, it can have negative impacts on the whole team. Okay, so you just want to keep that in mind. Next slide. We're not going to go through all the ins and outs and specifics in this particular training as far as the elements of a CTA. But again, I did want to point out for you some of the extra things, so to speak, that are elements of a CTA that you might not see in your typical teaming arrangements or teaming agreements. So keep these things in mind. Again, these are things that you're definitely going to be needing to clearly spell out, and everybody on that CTA is going to need to agree to these things as well. Okay, so things like your ordering procedures. Okay, who's going to be in charge of what portion of performance or what area or topic, depending on how your solicitation is broken up. Making sure that it shows if team A member is going to be in charge of this work area, and team lead is going to be in charge of this work area, that it specifically spells that out. That doesn't mean that you can't individually have subs. You certainly can, as long as there's nothing in your solicitation that prohibits it. But again, you want to make sure everything is specifically laid out. How the invoicing is going to be handled. Very, very important. Keeping in mind that for your pricing, typically, unless your solicitation states otherwise, typically everybody is going to be bound by the prices within their schedule. Okay, I have seen solicitations where it says to provide a combined rate, and that is something that sometimes the government asks for. But even when doing that, the team may propose a combined rate, but each member is still limited by the rates of their schedule within that combined rate. Okay, so you want to keep that in mind. And of course, the reporting requirements. Again, you're a co-prime, and you're still responsible for being compliant with your MSA contract. And so as part of that, you are still going to be responsible for reporting your sales and paying your IFF, unlike you would as a sub. And one of the biggest differences that you'll see with this type of agreement is that all members of the team have to sign the same agreement. And that will be submitted to the government as part of your proposal. Okay. So again, a couple of different things that are a little bit different that you want to keep an eye out for when you're breaching into this world of MSA CTAs. Okay, next slide. Three basics that you always want to keep in mind, right? If you take nothing else away from this, keep in mind that one, this is not a de facto prime sub relationship. Okay, keep that in mind when you're going through building a team. Keep that in mind when you're going through the agreement. It is very important how it's worded, and it's very important that everybody be treated as an equal team member. Again, as I mentioned in the last slide, the agreement itself will need to be submitted with the proposal and will be reviewed by the government. Okay. And another caveat that they have to these that, under these GSA MOS CTAs is that if it is a set aside for the small business, then all team members must comply with whatever that size set aside category is. Okay. Sometimes they're not set aside. They may limit it and say you can have one large business and up to five team members, only one can be a large business. But sometimes it's going to be set aside for 8As. And that means that everybody has to individually qualify as an 8A. Okay. Next slide. So now that we've talked about the uniqueness of the MOS CTAs, we're going to talk a little bit about the traditional contract teaming arrangements that you may be a little bit more familiar with. And those are the ones that fall under FAR 6.601. Next slide. We've got two different ones, right? And hopefully everybody's at least a little bit familiar with seeing these. You've got the first portion, which is that one is the one that's talking about joint ventures and everybody, forming a joint venture. And then your second part is the one, is very, very typical. And that's the one where you're talking about your prime sub relationship. Both your joint ventures and your prime sub relationships and those partnering arrangements and teaming arrangements fall under FAR 9.601. MOS CTAs do not. Okay, so that's the difference there. Next slide.
All right, it's time for our next polling question. Let's jump in. So before we get into joint ventures in detail, the question is, how comfortable are you with the concept of a joint venture? Me and JVs, well, we're besties. Or I know of them, but I really haven't explored how they could help me and my company. Maybe it's not for you, right? Some companies decide they're better off trusting in themselves. And then maybe this is a new concept for you and you haven't heard of it. So we're kind of waiting with bated breath for Sean to continue through the next slides. And so the majority, Sean, I see 67% of our audience knows of them, but they haven't really explored how they could help their company. So I know this is going to be enlightening for those of you. Second is we have 22% of the audience that uses them, and then 11% not really for them, not really for them. So Sean's going to walk us through now.
Sorry, had to get rid of that polling question on my screen. Okay, so yes, we're going to talk a little bit about JVs now, or joint ventures. I think it's very interesting, the polling that we got back, and I think probably fairly common as well, right? Especially, if you haven't jumped into this, this arena yet where JVs are concerned, it can be very scary. And you hear a lot about what it means, what it doesn't mean. I think the important thing to keep in mind is, just like with any other type of agreement, there are caveats that go with joint ventures. There are pros and cons that go with joint ventures, and most importantly, it's about knowing and getting good advice and sound, feedback, and working with a trusted partner. Okay, probably, in some ways, maybe a little bit more under a JV because, you are in some, depending on the situation, you may be forming a new legal entity with them. So definitely you want to make sure that it's a trusted partner that you're working with. But one of the things to keep in mind where JVs are concerned is that it's not a merger, okay? Meaning that it's not that the two of you are forming a company and you're now losing your company, okay? You are still, both companies still remain distinct unit companies in and of themselves. And under a joint venture, you're forming a partnership under a contract to then, as that partnership, bid and move forward on work. And it could be either that you are forming a new legal entity or an equity type JV, or that it's just a contract-based JV, usually for just one, one opportunity maybe, or short-term situation that you're going to be handling. So let's talk about each of those a little bit. Next slide. Just like anything, you always want to make sure, again, that when you're going in knowledgeable as much as you can, and or getting, seeking the advice that you need. But your basic things that you're going to be looking at, or the basic questions you're going to be wanting to ask is, why? Why would I do this versus, just a prime sub relationship? Okay. So the difference that you're going to see when you're talking about a JV is that, you're going to, you're going to be sharing your resources, obviously, and your expertise. So you're going to be joining it maybe with a company that is very similar to your field, or it may be in a company that, you want to put two things together, you and another company. Maybe you do services and you've got a company that does more supplies or the products that go along with those services. And so you want to form a JV to be able to offer both to the government under one solicitation, and be able to build how you're putting it out there. Okay. So, in a situation like that, JV can be a good alternative, right? It allows you to share profits. It allows you to share losses as well. So again, it's minimizing that risk for you. Depending on whether, this is long-term or short-term, it could be based on equity shares, or it could just be based on how you draft it for that particular contract. And of course, one of the big things that a lot of times you'll get out of that JV is the building of the relationships. Okay. It's going to allow you to explore a bigger realm. It may allow you, depending on which partner you're forming that JV with, you may be able to get into new markets that you couldn't individually by yourself. It may expose you to new partners because that, your JV partner has their typical subs or their typical companies that they generally work with that you've not really worked with yet. It's going to allow you to build those relationships and again, open that network for you and, bring more into it, as well as being able to grow what you're able, what opportunities you can be eligible for under those solicitations that you're looking at. Okay, next slide.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump in here just quickly and ask for those of you that are attending and have questions, please use the questions feature in Zoom to type in your questions, or you can copy paste them. I see some coming in the chat, but Zoom handles that a little bit differently. And I think we can do a better job in responding if you'll use the questions feature. Thank you so much. And sorry for the interruption, Sean.
No, not at all, Kathy. Thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned briefly, there are two different types of JVs. You've got your contractual JVs, and what those are typically, again, those are typically when you're having you're joining partnership, but it's generally going to be for one specific opportunity. Excuse me, it's usually for a short-term projects. And it's going to, your partners you're going to agree on your roles, your responsibilities, and your profit sharing for that specific contract. Okay, this is not when you're forming a new legal entity under a contractual JV. Okay, again, it's for your short-term based projects, and it is not going to have the same requirements as an equity JV, which we'll talk about next. The biggest difference between the two being that this is for short-term projects, and that, you are not forming a new legal entity the same as you would for an equity JV. Next slide. Okay, this is probably the JV that most people are familiar with, and is probably used, of the two, is definitely the one that's used probably more frequently. There is a little bit more involved in it, obviously, because you are forming a new legal entity. So in this situation, you are going to, you've got two, again, you still have two separate companies. Neither one of you're not merging, neither one of you is losing your individual companies, what you're doing is saying, hey, there's some, we have very good complementary skill sets, and or pulling us together is going to give us a really good shot. We don't want to give up our business, but we really think that, it's going to be worth it. And there's some long-term growth that we could do if we work together on certain things. Okay. So in that case, you are going to form, both of the companies are going to come together with an agreement, and you're going to form an equity JV. That is now going to become a new legal entity for you. Okay. Again, most often this is going to be beneficial to you when you've got long-term goals involved. Again, still want to stay with a trusted partnership, because again, you are forming a legal entity with this one. And so there are extra expenses and costs that come up with that. But the outcomes can be great if you do it right and really market it and use it to your advantage as much as possible. Okay. So in this case, you're going to have a separate company that both of you are part of. Generally, you're each going to have equity that goes into that. There's going to be an establishment of shares and, percentage wise as to who has what. There'll be an establishment of responsibilities. And then that equity joint venture, that legal entity, is now going to need a SAM registration. In order to bid on GSA contracts, that entity is going to need a GSA MOS schedule. And that it can open you up again to lots of things that you wouldn't ordinarily by yourself be eligible for under that legal entity. Obviously, yes, there are additional things that come with it. Excuse me. Profits and losses are going to be distributed by your ownership percentage, and that'll be decided in your agreement, whether it be, 60-40, however you decide that when you form that company and that legal entity, that's how things are going to be detailed in your agreement. Next slide. Okay. So again, going in with eyes open, you always want to make sure that you know what to watch for. What things should be red flags or should, send the tinglies that you want to make sure that you keep in mind and address during those conversations with your new partner. And of course, specifically during drafting of the agreement. And because you are forming a new legal entity, part of it is good in that you're not having all of it, that legal entity now has its own entity and own liability. So it's not all individually on your company. However, you also need to understand that that company now has a liability. Okay. And so if one partner creates problems, it could impact the other partner under that umbrella of the JV. Just like if one partner is having administrative or management issues, again, under that JV, you are both partners, and what they do can impact you, especially if there's performance issues. The performance issues of that JV are going to become a problem. Next slide. Yes, we talked a little bit about the liability from a legal perspective, but also we want to talk about your communication, right? Because just like any other partnership, your communication under a JV is going to be significantly important. And you want to make sure that you have, well-defined in your agreement how those things are going to be handled, how conflicts are going to be handled, how disputes are going to be handled between the companies, that are partners under that JV. Making sure that, we've got decisions to make. How are these decisions going to be made? Is it, everybody gets to vote? Is it, we're going to defer to so-and-so? How are those things going to be decided? And again, you want it to be equitable based on how you have drafted your ownership of that JV. Okay. You want to make sure that you have clear ways and effective ways of handling those things, because of course you don't want anything to hold up what it is that you're trying to bid on, the whole purpose behind forming this JV. Okay. And, finally, again, you want to make sure, as far as like disputes are concerned, how those things are going to be handled, and make sure that you have put in place effective communication strategies and elements to make sure that they do happen. We always hope that there's never going to be any problems. I think, all of us go in to partnerships generally with the hope that everything's going to be bright and shiny. But I think at the same time, all of us can agree that this is when your agreements become most important, right? All of that negotiation, all of that planning, all of that, oh, is this important? No, it's not. It's important to me. It's not important to you. All of that becomes so, so important when conflicts arise, when concerns happen. So it's not necessarily the fun and exciting part of government contracting. It's not the performance and, the drive and getting the work, but it's definitely the part that is going to be incredibly important if and when, hopefully not, but if and when those situations arise that are less than ideal. And what you have in your agreement and how you decided these things are going to be handled becomes most important. So you definitely want to make sure that you take the time to consider them and lay out a plan for how you're going to handle those situations. Next slide.
Okay, it's time for our next polling question. When we go into this one, so Sean,
Yes, ma'am.
I love this conversation, right? Because we are talking about joint ventures, the traditional prime sub relationship, but it sounds to me like most of these partnering opportunities are linked back to the GSA MOS schedule. Would you agree with that?
To an extent, yeah. To an extent. Again,
Oh, uh-oh, Sean locked up for a second. I'm going to go ahead and launch
sorry,
the
I think
poll.
I'm back.
You are back. You are back.
I don't know what happened there. I got Zoom quit.
No, we're fine. I was just noting that, these a lot of these opportunities outside of the traditional prime sub relationship reach back to the GSA MOS, right? So the polling question is, hey, is your company ready to be a team member or maybe a joint venture on a MOS CTA or some of these other opportunities that you've talked about so far today? And by far like 67% are saying maybe, but we haven't found the right opportunity. And that probably also, like reading between the lines, maybe we haven't found the right partner either. So when
Sure.
Stephanie comes on in a little bit, she's going to help. She's going to offer advice for helping to find the right partner.
It's like dating preview. And I swear, I'm sorry, but from everything I've heard, getting out of a partnership is almost harder than getting divorced from your real life in real IRL partner. So choose those partners wisely.
Absolutely, absolutely. And and I think too, with that question, like you were talking about, Kathy, I think one of the things that may be playing a role in that is, and definitely one of the reasons that we wanted to talk more about that MOS CTA situation is because, again, with this new renewed push going toward GSA, especially for some of those departments and agencies like DoD that didn't previously have that requirement.
Yeah,
You're going to see more and more of that, right?
I think
Where it is now being solicited under GSA. And so maybe your best alternative is not a prime sub, but a MOS CTA, so that you can still get that, that privy of contract and that past performance and all of those things as a prime. I definitely think we can agree that we're going to see more and more of that.
yes.
So, and finally, of course, the one that everybody was probably the most familiar with, which is your subcontracting. This is your typical or your traditional prime sub relationship, where you have one one business is operating as the prime, and they may have 1 to unlimited number of subs, depending on obviously the breadth of what the requirement is and what all they're doing, and what their team makeup is. Okay, so again, this is your typical, you may operate as the prime, in which case you're administering multiple subcontracts and having to track and do all of those things, whereas you may be someone that has typically been a sub, especially often as the small businesses coming in, you've operated in that sub world. It's a great place to start in GovCon. It truly is. It allows you to get your feet in the door. It allows you to get some experience and start to get some understanding of this crazy world that we refer to as GovCon and how it works, and all the wonderful additional regulations and both opportunities and restrictions that come along with it. So by all means, and there are some companies that prefer to stay as subcontractors. And that's how they live their whole life, and that's absolutely fine. And then of course you have those that come in as subs, and it's like, okay, I've gotten my feet wet, I've gotten comfortable, I'm ready to grow. And again, that's where those JVs and those CTAs sometimes become a great opportunity, the MSA CTAs for you. So your typical subcontract is where your prime is your awardee with the government, and they are the ones that are going to be answering and responsible to the government, and they need some portion of that work that they're responsible for. They need help getting that accomplished, either for a variety of different reasons. It could be because they don't have anyone that specializes. It could be a very niche thing. It could just be that it's a manpower thing. They've got multiple other contracts and they're busy, and they've got their people on something else, so we need somebody just to fill in a couple of these seats, kind of thing. But for whatever reason, subcontracting is the way they choose to go. Next slide. Again, subcontracting prime sub relationships can be very, very beneficial to both. Again, depending on which way you're on, right? As a prime, you're going to obviously take on those additional risks because you're the one ultimately responsible for the government, or to the government. You're the one that's going to be answering to the government. You're taking on the administrative burden of, administering those subcontracts, making sure that they're performing, making sure that they're being funded the way they need to, all those extra things. But again, being able to do that still provides you with flexibility, right? You're the prime, you have ultimate responsibility. You can use a sub, you can change subs if you need to, you can bring somebody new on if you need to, use them for certain portions of the work as opposed to hiring somebody in for just that limited portion of work. As a subcontractor, again, you don't have all those additional risks and administrative burdens necessary that a prime would have. So, you can have flexibility either way. And again, even as a sub, whether you're the prime or the sub, you're still getting, to focus on your core areas. Maybe as a sub, again, you're in a very niche area, and that's where you like, and that's where you want to live, and so you're going to market that so that you can contribute to larger contracts, but in your core area. Okay, next slide. As with all things, we want to look at the other side of how this works. And so again, much like the other two, just with different variables, you always want to make sure that, again, you have those communications. You have in your contracts, in your agreement with your sub, again, whether you're the prime or the sub, you want to make sure that it's clearly laid out in there. How are you going to handle when there are disputes? How is invoicing going to be handled? How is it going to be handled if, there's prime and or the government has an issue with some of the work from the subcontractor? How are they going to be paid? What rates are they going to be paid by? Are you going to use the same contract type for your prime, for your sub as you have for your government prime contract? You may not. Okay. Again, all different types of things to consider, but you always want to make sure that because in that prime subcontract relationship, you as the sub are dependent on that prime. vice versa. Yes, as the prime, you're also dependent on those subs, but again, making sure that your agreements are written that depict how that dependency is. Okay, and again, very important, much like Stephanie mentioned, in any agreement, you always, of course, like I said, want to make sure that you are identifying how disputes and conflicts are going to be handled, as well as termination. Always something that should be considered in any of your agreements, and that's both for the sub and the prime. But as a subcontractor, I would say you always want to make sure that you have an exit ramp, for lack of a better term, to make sure that, you know, if things go sideways, you have recourse as well. Always things you want to keep in mind. And again, having that open communication, making sure that you're communicating with your primes. Because if you stop doing that and or they stop communicating with you, you can almost always guarantee there's going to be something that gets left on the table. There's going to be something that happens with performance. And if you're not communicating as things go on, then that tends to build and it builds and it builds until there's an explosion. And if at all possible, you always want to avoid that. Okay. I do want to let you know, I provided the link here for you as well, to give you more information about subcontracting and preventive contracts. It's a link to, several blog posts that are out on our website. You're more than welcome to take a look at them. And of course, if you have any questions, just let us know. Next slide. All right.
Over to me.
Turn this over to Stephanie and let her talk to you about GovMates.
I know. Sean, thank you so much. You did an awesome job of spelling out all the things. I'm going to go very quickly on GovMates, mainly because I know that people have some really great questions for you. And I'm the least important person on here. I do want to tell people it's great to see everyone. Thank you for coming out. I see some old names from afar. So hello. I can't individually type you, but hello to my peoples. All right, so we have talked about all things CTA. You guys know GSA is going to be hot and heavy. We know that DoD contractors are like, GSA who, what, when, where? So yeah, everybody's out there trying to get a schedule. Everybody's trying to figure out what their strategy is for teaming. So for those of you who may not know or know anything about GovMates, I am here to give you a quick preview of it. So I want to build the team. What the heck do I do? First off, hopefully you have at least a couple answers and you've got a couple people in your bag of tricks that you've already been working with. But to get you a wider variety of potential teaming partners, GovMates might be a great option. Next slide. So what the heck is GovMates? GovMates is an enterprise level solution. We are a teaming platform in the cloud. We have actually to date over 7,800 small non-traditional businesses within our platform. We've been around for more years than I want to admit to, for those who may know me and my colleague Katie. And we have to date, I think these numbers are probably outdated by about a week, but over 40,000 matches in our platform and over 11,000 introductions. So Kathy, next slide. So what is GovMates? We work with large integrators, we work with government and the government itself, and we work with smalls. And we provide a teaming opportunities for small businesses and non-traditionals. This could be for a specific opportunity, like, hi, I'm going after this next RFP. I know I need a insert flavor here, a woman-owned small business or an 8A or SDVOSB, and I need this sort of capability. And I know that my team doesn't have this, so this is what we need. Or it could be for road mapping. You'd be surprised how many people come to us and are like, we're doing 5-year planning, which right now seems crazy, but we're doing this long planning and we're going after it. And we want to start talking to small businesses that have these sort of capabilities. The government also uses us occasionally for sources sought. So to see what type of research there is out there. Our goal is to foster this collaboration and to provide introductions to everyone. We want to see you guys win new work, and we want to see you guys be successful. Next slide. And so how does it work? So for anyone who hasn't already, go on to govmates.com and create a profile. Creating this profile takes about 15 minutes or so. It's free for you to use. It's free for you to do it. You will only have access to your profile, and the people who see the profiles in terms of our login in our system are only GovMates W-2s. All right. Let's go to the next slide, and we will tell you all the information that we take. So it's anything and everything that you care about from a teaming perspective. So what contract vehicles are you on? Okay, do you have the GSA mass contract, right? What are the SLINs we're operating under? What are your core capabilities, right? Like hopefully you should be able to fill this out pretty quickly. The thing you got to go Google is the NAICS codes that no one remembers or may have issues with. Give me a revenue size, give me a clearance, give me a cut it, and then your past performance, right? What agencies are you doing work with? And this could be as prime or sub. So we care about anything from a teaming perspective. We collect this information. There's even a place for you to tell us which OTAs you're part of, which consortia, and to upload your capability statement. From there, we're off to the races. So next slide. People come to us, they ask us for a specific match, if you will, and anyone can ask. So want to give you guys the information. If you are priming an opportunity, please send us an email and you can ask us any of these types of things. We prepare a report of all the people who met the criteria. You'll see an example right here with Dark Horse Technologies. So you see what that looks like. And then you tell us who you'd like to be introduced to. We don't do anything proactively. We wait for you to review it. And then once you tell us, we do email intros and then we're out. From there, you guys go to NDAs, teaming agreements, and all the other things that you care about. And so we're there to serve as a conduit to provide introductions and collaboration between industry. So that is a very high level perspective on what GovMates is. Happy to answer any questions in the chat or reach out to me online. Everything is on our website, including a collaboration page, which has all of our upcoming events. We do matchmaking in person, we do virtual. We have networking events also for you to meet other potential teaming partners, including one in June. All right, Kathy, I've gone as quickly as I can and said a whole bunch of stuff really quickly. I know we've got some great questions though.
That's awesome. And yes, we do have some great questions queued up. I'm just going to run through the key takeaways. By the end of today, you should have a little bit of a better idea of what a MSA CTA is or a joint venture, the two kinds of joint venture. One, you need a lawyer, one maybe not so much. And what is the traditional prime sub relationship and how to compare and contrast these things with the pros and cons. And hey, still haven't found the right partner? GovMates can probably help with that. So now over to questions and answers, and we do have some really good ones in the gallery. Sean, I'm going to send this first one to you. Can I use a CTA as a creative solution for a proposal if the RFP is silent on it and doesn't ask for them?
Oh, you're still on mute, Sean.
Apologize. I didn't want to interrupt you when you were speaking.
Oh, thank you.
Great question. Great question. And I think, I mean, the answer when we're talking about CTAs, we've got your MSA CTAs and then we've got your FAR CTAs, right? But honestly, I think the answer for this one is pretty much the same across the board. If it's silent, it's not prohibited. So, and that's the case where most solicitations are concerned. That said, if you're not sure, if you want, that's something you may want to be able to ask during the questions and answer period. If you want to reach out and get clarification on that, just for ensuring purposes. I think the biggest thing, of course, like I said, if it's silent, it's not prohibited. And it's just something, as long as you are disclosing your team with your proposal and not telling the government, saying that I'm doing this all by myself when actually I'm not, then you're going to have a problem. But as long as you're disclosing that you are proposing and using either subs, or you're proposing as a JV, or you're proposing as a MSA CTA, you should be just fine.
Awesome. That's great. And I have one for Stephanie for GovMates.
Sure.
Stephanie, you mentioned that GovMates is free for anyone to register, and the example on the slide was like for a sub who's looking to match for a prime. Do primes have to pay for the service?
No, they don't. Anyone requesting does not need to pay. It is actually a free service. We do get paid in other ways that people don't normally care about, but training, education, conference organizers pay us for facilitating matchmaking at different events. We've got AUSA, Sierra Space, those types of things. We just finished up at Soft Week as well. But no, anyone can send an email requesting. The key is that you have to be the prime. Because if you were the sub, I promise you, yes, we know you want a prime. So does everybody else. Welcome to the world. But what we need is the people who have the need and are controlling the RFP are the ones that actually get the, if you will, ability to ask. We care about who's got the money, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. I think we have time for one more. Sean, I think this one is for you. How is a JV entity different from a mentor-protege agreement?
Okay, so there's a couple different ways that it's a little bit different. And probably one of the most is the purpose, right? So your purpose of your JV is to pursue larger projects, while your mentor protege programs are designed to support and bring up a small business along the way, right? So grant you, as a JV, you may form a mentor protege relationship, but the purpose behind the two different types of relationships are a little bit different.
Yeah, I understand. And I understand the source of confusion because I
Yeah.
have seen JVs that were built. I don't think they're the lawyer kinds. I think they're the agreement kinds, but they're built around MPP relationships, right? They use the joint venture agreement as a framework or a tool for setting up how are we going to interact and how are we going to pursue work together.
Right, right.
All right. Well, that was great. There were some additional questions that I think we're out of time for today, and they're a little bit more in depth. So we have our wonderful director, Nita Tardu, answering those in the background. But I assure you, all of your questions will be answered either by email or we'll reach out to you directly after the webinar. I want to thank you both. It was a great presentation. I learned a couple things. And I enjoyed every bit of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right,
Thank
everyone,
you.
have a lovely day. Don't forget the slides are going to become available on our website. The webinars with the recordings will be there at boostllc.net. That is boostllc.net. There are also some great resources there. You'll see the link in the presentation, but feel free to look around on our website while you're there. There's some great blogs, resources, and lots of goodies and nuggets for our customers. So thank you so much for attending, everyone, and I hope you have a great afternoon.